Right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the presentations today. I know I certainly have. So we're into our last presentation of the day, but probably a very, very interesting one. It's my pleasure to introduce Joy Nott, Partner, Trade and Customs at KPMG Canada, with 30 years of expertise in trade and customs. Joy is a partner at KPMG and former CEO of the Canadian Importers and Exporters Association. So as you can see, she has deep experience and knowledge. She is a trusted advisor to government and media commentator. She brings deep insight on global trade, supply chain, and compliance, just what we need right now. And as the global trade dynamics shift and the renegotiation of CUSMA looms, family businesses face yet a new frontier of opportunity and risk. As one of Canada's leading international trade strategists, Joy brings extensive knowledge and expertise in this area, making her a natural to speak on the topic of navigating trade and tariffs in a shifting North American landscape. Please join me in welcoming Joy Nott.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to test the mic. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. As was just said, my name is Joy Nott, and I guess I must have given you an old bio because 2025 is my 40th year doing trade and customs, not 30. But today I'm going to be talking to you about three different things. The first thing is the state of play. The second thing is going to be, I'm going to touch on some high-level strategies. I'm sure you can appreciate an actual strategy depends on a lot of different factors that exist within a company. No one strategy fits all companies, but I'm going to talk to you about some high-level stuff that people are doing. And then, of course, I'll be here afterwards to answer questions one-on-one. And then finally, I'm going to talk about expanding markets. So the first thing is the state of play. Now, after the inauguration in the United States on January 20th, it was on February 4th that tariffs were first mentioned about becoming effective. On January 20th, they were mentioned. It was said that tariffs were going to take effect. It said that they were going to take effect on February 4th. There was a 30-day delay. March 4th onwards, we're in a situation of tariffs. And one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, how exactly are tariffs calculated? It may seem like a simple question, but for a lot of companies who are used to zero as a number, it doesn't matter how you calculate it if you get to zero, right? Doesn't matter what the formula is. When the formula is not zero, suddenly it matters. So there are some things that exist in international trade. First one being a tariff classification number. Basically, it's a 10-digit number. Picture, if you will, in your mind, a book that if you were to print it is about 14 inches thick, printed on both sides. It's called the nomenclature. It's adhered to by all the World Trade Organization countries, the WTO countries. And what a tariff classification is, it's a numerical way of describing goods that the world can agree on. It's a common language that people, to describe things, no matter what country you're in, no matter what language you're talking, no matter what nicknames products might have and whatnot, these numbers kind of scrape all of that away and get us down to what internationally is known as the description. You marry that number with the country of origin. So picture in your mind like an Excel spreadsheet. I know my number, my country of origin is here, go across, here's my rate. Okay, that's your normal rate of duty. That's the way that you normally calculate duty long before the current administration in the United States. It's just straight arithmetic. What's happening now is you take that normal rate of duty, which might be zero, you drop down to the second line, and you're looking at 25%, 35%, 50%, 40%, depends. 10%, depends on what you're talking about. Add those two things together, multiply it by something called the customs value, and I'm not going to get into customs value today. It's another set of rules that the World Trade Organization has put in place so that everybody around the world calculates that number using the same formulas. So it levels the playing field. That's all I'm going to say about that, because it can get quite complicated. You add all that together, that's how much duty you owe. So I am not going to speak to this slide in detail. You are going to get a copy of the slides to take away with you. What I want to draw your attention to on these slides are the two navy blue bands. I'm going to start with the lower one. Industry-based tariffs, otherwise known as Section 232 tariffs. Section 232 tariffs, if you said to me, characterize them, Joy, have presidents in the past used Section 232 tariffs? Absolutely. Are they legal? Every day, all day, all the time. Are they new? Nope. Been in place since 1962. So they're not new. What is new is the degree at which they're being used right now. So normally, for Section 232 tariffs, a company goes to the government and says, I need your support. I need you to back me. There's something happening on the international stage. I need you, as my government, to back me up on something. So in the United States, that work is given to the Secretary of Commerce. In normal times, the Secretary of Commerce would take that complaint, I'll call it, and go away and do all kinds of economic studies and deep analysis, and they would come back somewhere between 6 and 12 months later and give a specific recommendation to the president about what to do about this situation. It could be, the recommendation could be do nothing. The recommendation could be, has been true over the last 3 presidencies, do something specific against China, just to name one country. So there's all kinds of recommendations that can be made to the president. But those types of tariffs apply against goods. So steel and aluminum, auto parts, lumber. The navy blue line on the top are something called I.E.P.A. tariffs. So not all tariffs are created equal. I.E.P.A. stands for the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That's why everybody calls it I.E.P.A. Those sets of tariffs are charged against countries. And in recent times, those are what you hear called reciprocal tariffs. Now, if you said to me, Joy, explain to me what a reciprocal tariff is, I really can't, because until about 10 months ago, I've been doing international trade for 40 years. I'd never heard of a reciprocal tariff. The World Trade Organization does not know what a reciprocal tariff is. It's a new construct in the world of international trade. So how the current administration in the United States describes it, if you charge me, if you're a country, and I'm a country, I'm the United States, if you charge me 10% on something, I want to charge you 10% back. Except go back to that book that I said that is this thick. There's no way the US could, times 195 countries in the United Nations, there's no way they could come up with a number for each country, for each product in that book. So we ended up with bands of tariffs, these reciprocal tariffs. Canada's tariffs are for illegal immigration and shipping fentanyl to the United States. And that rate is currently set at 35%. Now, what's interesting about the I.E.P.A. tariffs is that they've been challenged in court. And have they been challenged in court by a large corporation? No. They have been challenged in court by a very small company who brings in wooden blocks from China and Vietnam to teach children various games and whatever with numbers and letters. They're a tiny company. They brought a lawsuit to the Court of International Trade saying that, hey, wait a minute, the president does not have the authority under I.E.P.A. to charge tariffs. Read the act. The act is only 48 pages long. Nowhere in I.E.P.A. is the word tariff. I.E.P.A. was created in the late 1970s for Jimmy Carter. And if you think about what was happening in the late 70s, in Jimmy Carter's reign. There were American hostages in Tehran. The Congress really felt we need to give the president emergency powers so that if he has to make a decision like that because American lives are on the line, we're behind you, Mr. President. We're going to give you the I.E.P.A. legislation, and that's going to allow you to act quickly without having to come to us to ask for permission. But it was supposed to be used, obviously, in very rare circumstances and when it was truly an emergency. So what the president did was he declared an emergency. What was the emergency? Persistent trade deficits with countries. That's the national emergency. And he put reciprocal tariffs across all the countries in the world. So that small company took it to the Court of International Trade and said, wait a minute, a piece of legislation that was meant to put sanctions and stuff in is now being used for tariffs. Is that legal? The Court of International Trade looked at it and said, no, it's not legal. So they said immediately the tariffs have to stop being charged. Immediately, within 24 hours, the administration in the United States announced that they were going to appeal that particular decision. They took it to the Federal Court of Appeal in Washington, D.C., who also said, we agree, the tariffs are illegal. Okay, so we are now off to the Supreme Court. Oral arguments were heard on November 5th. I'm probably one of 10 people in the world that actually listened to the whole thing. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. 2 of them, I can tell you, I'm sure to the core of my body, are going to agree with the president that I.E.P.A. gives the president powers to tax. And that's the fundamental argument here. Does I.E.P.A. give the government, the president, the power to tax? Because a duty is a tax, despite what you may hear. A duty is a tax. In the US Constitution, Article 1 created Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate. Only the people can tax the people in the United States. So anybody here ever heard of the Boston Tea Party? Right? Do you know what the Boston Tea Party was about? For those of you who may not know, the King in England put a tariff on tea. Americans at that time said, we're sick of these tariffs from the King. They dumped all the tea into the harbor. That's how it got called the Boston Tea Party. And then they promptly had a revolution and they left the United Kingdom, all over tariffs. Ironic? So don't really know what's going to happen at the Supreme Court. In my personal opinion, not that of KPMG, I just need to say that. I think there's probably, it's going to be 5-4 and the president will lose. That's me guessing. I can tell you there's 2 justices that definitely agree with the president. You could tell by the questions they were asking, the comments they were making, the tone of their voice. There's 2 of them out of 9. They're convinced the president should be able to do literally anything he wants to, and it doesn't really matter what I.E.P.A. says. The other justices were questioning, splitting hairs on whether or not a duty is technically defined as a tax. But in the US Constitution, Article 1, which created Congress, specifically speaks to Congress has the ability to apply a tax and a tariff. So the word tariff is in the Constitution because I just explained why they had a revolution. It's not the only reason, but I mean, it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. So, now I just explained that there's 2 different kinds of tariffs. So if you think back to this spring, when it was February, March, April, you had tariffs after tariff after tariff. True story, I was on a call with a client for 45 minutes. At the beginning of the call, the tariffs were on. Partway through the call, the tariffs were off. By the time we hung up, the tariffs were back on. That was March, okay? So you had tariffs that stacked on top of tariffs that stacked. So at the end, I mean, I'm sure you probably ended up hearing that, like China had tariffs that like were 145%, and Europe was, depending on the commodity, was like 75%. These numbers were awe-inspiring. In April, the government finally admitted, okay, we didn't mean for these things to stack. It's not really what we intended to do, but in the chaos of popping out tariffs like literally like it was popcorn, they ended up being stacked because no instructions were given to the customs authorities at the border not to stack. So you've got a piece of steel, it's 50%, and it comes from Canada, it's 35%, that's 85% on your shipment. Wow. In April, they came out and they said, okay, we're gonna put a stacking order in place. This slide makes it look simple. I can tell you if you read that executive order, it doesn't read simply. It's very complex, but that's, in other words, what it breaks down to. So just to give you a quick example, if what you're talking about is an automotive part, you stop there and you charge the 25% on automotive parts, and you don't charge anything else. If it's not an automotive part, is it made of whatever you are talking about, is it made of aluminum? If it's made of aluminum, that's where you stop, you pay the 50%, you don't pay anything else, et cetera. You keep going down the list. Now, in August, so August 15th was a Friday. Look it up. On August 15th at about 3:45-ish in the afternoon, an executive order was dropped adding 407 new products to the steel and aluminum list. When was it effective? August 18th. That's a Monday. Look it up. So Friday at 3:45, as business, you got warning that Monday, so Sunday night at midnight, 12:01, Monday, boom, 407 new products. What was included in these products? All kinds of different things. But if I said to you, hairspray, if you were in the hairspray business, what does your business have to do with steel and aluminum? The can. So suddenly, Friday night, hairspray manufacturers went to bed, not because most of them didn't see the executive order, came out late in the day, went to bed. Monday morning they got up and their hairspray now had a 50% tariff on it. Then what happened? Tariffs are also, not quite as frequently, but they're also being reduced. So back on September 5th, that was a Friday, look it up, an executive order dropped saying that it was going to become effective on September 8th, that was a Monday, look it up. And what that did was it basically said, okay, we recognize as the United States that we cannot grow, mine, or naturally produce everything that we need, and in some cases not to the sufficient volume that we need as Americans. So when it's stuff like that, if it's a country that we have a deal with, and I'm going to talk about the deals in a little bit in a moment, then we're willing to talk about not charging tariffs on that stuff because we need it. Now that stuff was a list of 45 things. Nickel, gold, metals, for the most part, critical minerals, some pharmaceuticals, that kind of stuff was on the list. More recently, on November 13th, which I can't remember the day of the week it is, and it became effective on the 13th, so now we're going backwards in time, they dropped the tariffs on a whole bunch of foodstuffs. Why? Because groceries and the price of groceries was starting to really go up in the United States. It was starting to make headline news. This groundswell was starting about, hey, when we elected the president, the price of eggs, right? It was all about the price of eggs. Well, eggs have come down, but everything else has gone up. So on November 13th, just before Thanksgiving, removed the tariffs on a whole bunch of foodstuffs. The question that's being asked now, so I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I try and vary who I listen to so that I get a rounded picture. I listen to a lot of far right podcasts because I just want to hear what they're saying, and then I have far left and then central. On the far right, they're starting to ask, why did he remove the tariffs on food? I thought other countries pay the tariffs. Why did he remove the tariffs on food? The question is starting to be asked. So I talked to you about deals. And I talked to you about the fact that the nomenclature, if you were to print it, is about 14 inches thick, printed on both sides. If you were to print out the current free trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico, it would print out at about 12 inches thick, printed on both sides. These deals are a page and a half. So as an international trade professional, I have no idea what these things are. But they're not trade deals in the way that I've known trade deals. Trade deals that have deep economic analysis that sits behind the actual legislation, so that a particular duty rate was calculated and negotiated with a whole bunch of information to back up that decision. These deals are a page and a half long, and they relieve I.E.P.A. tariffs. So these deals are all based on I.E.P.A. tariffs. Well, what happens if they lose at the Supreme Court and I.E.P.A. tariffs are declared illegal? What are these deals worth? Don't know. Now, the other thing about these deals, and it's happened now a few times, is if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of these slides, there was a deal announced with South Korea on July 31st. Hit the media, we have a deal with South Korea. And it was all over the media. And then has the months, and then I can't remember the exact date, but shortly thereafter, a bunch of ICE agents went into a Hyundai facility in either North or South Carolina, I can't remember, and took 400 South Koreans who were in the United States helping to set up a battery factory there, put them on planes and sent them back to Seoul, saying that they were in the United States illegally. So South Korea not only was, needless to say, a little bit peeved about that, they were also questioning what they heard in the media is not what they had agreed to behind closed doors. So suddenly, you had what was in the media, and you had, so the two parties who supposedly have a deal don't agree. And this has happened more than once. I'm just using South Korea as an example. So a deal finally did get signed with South Korea, but on October 29th, when it was announced as a deal on July 31st. Now, recently the president, along with our prime minister and other leaders, were in Asia, and deals were announced with Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam. But I'm going to say deals. I'm using my fingers to make air quotes for those on camera who can't see me. So, is anything signed? No. What will it look like? I don't know. What will happen if sometime, so for the Supreme Court decision on I.E.P.A. tariffs, we're expecting that to happen sometime early 2026, January. It is on the fast track, so there is a chance that it could come out calendar 2025. Don't know. But if that Supreme Court decision comes down and makes I.E.P.A. tariffs illegal, again, what are these deals worth? So enough talk about the United States. Let's talk about Canada. So when the tariffs were first put on, Canada went elbows up, right? Elbows up, right back at you. You're going to charge us tariffs, right back at you. So if you look in the far right-hand side of this screen, the gray box, there was a list of tariffs. It was referred to as List 1 because there were 3 lists. And what the Canadian government said was, we're going to hit you first with List 1. And if the conversation doesn't go well and negotiations don't go well, I'm going to hit you with List 2 after that, and it's going to get more painful. And if we get into an all-out holy war, List 3 will drop. We never got past List 1. List 1 contained things like orange juice, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, porcelain sinks and toilets and bathtubs out of Pennsylvania, Tennessee whiskey. I could go on. I think you get a general trend as to what's happening here. In 2018, 2019, when President Trump, under Trump 1.0, as I like to say, he issued tariffs on steel and aluminum back then, and Canada was caught. And what our strategy was at the time to counter is we said, okay, we're going to take a map, we're going to look at this map, we're going to identify all the Republican states, and what's their #1 export to Canada? That's what we're tariffing. And it worked. Because now you had governors picking up the phone and calling the White House saying, hey, you got to do something, man. The biggest industry in my state is hurting. Because for 35 of the 50 states in the United States, Canada is their #1 export market. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more at the end as well. So list 1 was basically blow the dust off the 2018-2019 strategy. We're going to do it again. Worked last time, we're going to do it again. In September, the list was repealed. Late August, effective September 1st, the list was repealed. And there was a lot of, what are we doing? We put our elbows down. Repealed meaning those tariffs, we took those tariffs off. What are we doing? We're putting our elbows down. Wasn't working this time. Who's paying the tariffs on the orange juice and the bathtubs and the Tennessee whiskey? No, Canadians are. And were those tariffs getting us anywhere in Washington? No. So we took them off. We didn't put our elbows down. We had to pivot and take on a new strategy. The other thing that a lot of Canadians don't realize, I'm going to talk about the Biden administration now for a moment, is during the Biden administration, President Biden had an opportunity and did not take it to remove all of the tariffs that Trump 1.0 put in place. So he put tariffs on steel and aluminum that Europe and some other countries continue to pay steel and aluminum tariffs all during the Biden administration. Biden didn't take them down, and I'll explain why in a little while. At the same time, the Biden administration decided to put a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum from China and a 100% tariff on electric EVs coming out of China. With the thinking being that if electric EVs hit North America, that's the end of the North American automotive industry. That's the fear. So Canada, at that time, were in lockstep with President Biden. You're doing the tariffs 25% on China, we're right there with you. You're putting 100% we're right there with you on the EVs. So a lot of Canadians don't realize that. We're actually having, I don't want to call it a trade war, I don't like those words, but we're having tariff disputes with 2 countries, the United States and China. And today at 3:15 Eastern, which would have been right about now, I guess, or no, a couple of hours ago, the Prime Minister was making additional announcements on steel. We're going to be limiting the amount of steel that we allow into Canada, and we're going to treat the countries we have free trade agreements with differently than countries we don't have free trade agreements with. So if we don't have a free trade agreement with you, you're going to be allowed to bring in 50% of the amount of steel that your country brought into our country in 2024. And then we're capping it. Why? We're trying to protect our steel industry. And if you have a free trade agreement with you, you have the full quota of whatever you brought in 2024, you can bring it in 2025, and then we're capping it. Okay? CUSMA, so I get asked a lot, doesn't CUSMA, our free trade agreement, protect us from tariffs? It protects us from I.E.Canada tariffs. Doesn't protect us from sectoral tariffs at the bottom of the screen, the steel, the aluminum, all that stuff, does not protect us. I'm not going to go through this slide, it's just there in case anybody wants to know. We're charging 25% on US-made vehicles, except a vehicle manufacturer who can prove how much of that vehicle was Canadian and Mexican. They can carve out those 2 values and not pay tariffs on those 2 values. So just imagine now, you're a large OEM, you've got a finished vehicle you're shipping across the border, and somebody wants you to do the math on how much of it was Canadian, how much of it was Mexican, and then define what's Canadian and what's Mexican. If you made something in Canada with Chinese steel, is it Chinese, is it Canadian? So anyway, that's what's happening at the border. And what's new on this particular slide is the red line at the bottom. I know I'm in Winnipeg, but I don't know if you guys would have heard as much as we heard in Ontario. about the closing of the Stellantis plant in Brampton, Ontario, and about 3,000 jobs. And then there was a plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, for General Motors that made electric vans, delivery vans, that decided they're closing down those lines. Shortly after Prime Minister Carney came into power, what he negotiated here was he said to the American, well, all the OEMs, Toyota and Honda included, you can bring in X amount of cars free of this tariff. Forget all of this. As long as you continue to invest in Canada, keep Canadians employed, and don't start pulling out. You start pulling out, we're going to remove the number of cars you can get in for free. So because Stellantis announced that they were closing down the Brampton facility, they lost 50% of their allocation for free cars. And we buy a lot more cars than we make in Canada. That's a painful decision for Stellantis. And the Canadian government is looking at taking legal action. Legal action for what reason? Stellantis, amongst others, received all kinds of taxpayer funds in the way of subsidies during the financial crisis and shortly after, when they were on the verge of bankruptcy and whatever. We gave them our tax dollars. They promised to stay here. They're pulling out now. See you in court. That's basically the government's current stance. And General Motors lost 24.2% of their allocation for closing a smaller plant in London. And again, General Motors is now looking at the impact of this. I haven't heard if there's going to be a lawsuit against GM, but there's definitely going to be a lawsuit against Stellantis. So that's the state of play. Let's now get into some high-level strategies. I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail. The first two only work going into the United States. They don't work coming into Canada, and it's because of some specific US laws and stuff, which I won't get into, but they're southbound strategies. The rest of them work both directions, coming in or coming into Canada, coming into the United States. So if you think back to that formula that I showed you, tariff classification plus country of origin equals tariff, what these strategies basically do is they take each one of those bubbles and they look at it strategically to say, can we tweak any of these things to make that last bubble with the total amount of tariffs owing lower? Can't reduce it to zero. There are few rare instances where you can get duty-free access to the United States. I won't get into it here. There's all kinds of rules around it. Yeah, I can speak one-on-one with anybody who wants to know more than that. But it's not easy. It does not apply widely. You have to fit a certain fact pattern, and it can be complex. In Canada, we had list 1 that I talked about. April 16th, shortly after the election, no, before the election, the Carney government said, if you're bringing list 1 goods into Canada, or steel and aluminum into Canada for further manufacturing, we're going to waive the tariffs for 6 months while we talk. That 6 months expires December 16th. It was supposed to expire in September. They extended it to December while we continue to talk to the US. Again, I don't really want to go through these because it's too much detail. This slide just kind of shows you the complexity of making international trade decisions. So back in February and March, when I was talking to clients, everybody's hair was on fire. The question I was getting asked most of, can you help me calculate how much cash I have to pay out at the end of the month? Because every month you import all month long, and then you pay the government at the end of the month. So people were freaking out. How much are we going to have to pay this month? And liquidity and cash flow and that was the #1 question that I was being asked, and I was working with companies to help them to resolve that. By the time late spring, early summer came along, June, July timeline, people were saying, this can't last forever, it's crazy. I just have to come up with a strategy to survive the next 6 months, and then in 6 months, everything should, settle down. I just need to survive the next 6 months. So no one was willing to look at, big changes to their supply chain or anything, because it's like, no, I just need a 6-month solution. Get me over 6 months and I'll be good. Now, I'm having more and more conversations, and it's just starting to hit the Canadian business community. Tariffs are not going anywhere. I get asked frequently, but President Trump cannot be president forever, despite what he may say. He can't be president forever. If the Democrats come in, won't a lot of this go back to normal? Democrats have never been free traders, ever. I could tell you stories about President Obama, and I like President Obama. He was a Democrat. He was not a free trader. Democrats believe in tariffs, not 50% tariffs, but they believe in tariffs. Republicans are free traders, and it started with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan did all the heavy lifting for NAFTA, and then Bill Clinton signed it because there was an election, and anyway, Bill Clinton signed it. But Ronald Reagan did all the heavy lifting for NAFTA. That's a Republican. And every Republican government after that, free trade, free trade, free trade. The United States signed something like 35 free trade agreements in 17 years. They were out there, they wanted free trade with the world. The Republicans are no longer free traders, and the Democrats have never been free traders. So, does it make a difference who wins the White House next time as to whether or not tariffs come or go? I think tariffs are here to stay. The rates are likely going to change. I would bet you the rates will change. I think zero tariffs, those days are behind us for the foreseeable future. So what this slide shows is that long-term thinking. Okay, I get it. Tariffs are not going anywhere. I now need to start making fundamental changes to my supply chain. I need to start asking myself questions about what countries I'm making goods in, how I'm shipping these goods around the world, where strategically should I be, not just from a tariffs perspective. Let's not forget income tax. Let's not forget, all the other factors that you sort of have to factor in. You can't let the tail wag the dog. You don't make all of your decisions based on tariffs. But it has to be now a major decision maker. So you start off on the far left-hand side with customs planning. That's the easy part. That's the rates and the math. That's the easy part. As you start going towards the right, it starts getting more and more complex. Now you're looking at potentially a US manufacturing footprint, because I do talk to a lot of companies about moving at least part of their production to the United States, because so much of their market share, so much of their customers are in the US, they need to do that. And then at the very bottom right-hand corner, the target operating model, because we're in a new reality and it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. So what does your new operation look like moving forward for the next few years? Now this slide, I am not going to speak to it all. This slide, KPMG created a technology tool. And that's what this slide talks to. And I'm not here to sell anybody the KPMG technology tool. The reason why we had to create a technology tool is because international trade data does not sit in any importers or exporters company. Within their four walls, they may be running SAP, they may be running, name another ERP system. They've got their computers, they've got their warehouse management system, they have their EPM for purchasing. They have all kinds of systems within their company. Nowhere in their company is there international trade data. Who's got their international trade data? Customs brokers. And I know there's one in the room here somewhere, because I was talking to him before. Customs brokers have it, and the government has it. So suddenly, when tariffs are the way that they are, and C-level executives are asking questions like, what's my spend on product X? The staff is going, I don't know, I'm waiting to get the data. What do you mean you're waiting to get the data? We don't have the data. So we created a tool, and if you get the data, what it is a huge, ugly Excel spreadsheet. That's not very useful, right? So we created a tool to crunch that so that executives could quickly look at dashboards and get answers quickly. So that's another sort of wake-up call that the Canadian international trade community, those who import and export, had the recognition for the first time. Holy cow, I don't even have my own data. Got to fix that moving forward on a permanent basis. So a lot of companies now are looking at how they can integrate this data into their existing systems. So my favorite part, expanding into new markets. So on the recent budget, the budget broke down into 5 chapters. Chapter 2 predominantly dealt with shifting from reliance to resilience. That's speaking from reliance, over-reliance on the US economy, to resilience. And specifically, Chapter 2.2 speaks to my sweet spot. The Canadian government overall is looking at spending $280 billion in cash, broken up, as you see, sort of scrambled on the right-hand side. This is how it breaks down from an international trade perspective. So they're investing $12 billion that for the most part goes to Global Affairs Canada. It's for programs to help companies to get from where they are today to a more diversified export footprint. The Prime Minister has stated that he would like to see Canadian exports to non-US destinations double over the next 10 years. 77 cents out of every Canadian dollar exported goes to the United States currently. 77 cents. Compare it to your own investments. If you had 77% of your investments in one company, what would your financial advisor say? Unless it was your own company, right? What would your financial advisor say? You're not properly balanced. Your risk portfolio is way too high. 77 cents out of every Canadian dollar goes to the US. So we're going to look at bringing it down closer to 50%, because realistically, we're always going to trade with the United States. We're geographically next door to them. They're the largest market in the United States. Of course we're going to trade with them. But let's get it down around 50%, and let's diversify the other 50% to lessen our risk. So that $12 billion to global affairs is all kinds of programs, including one that I actually, okay, keep in mind I'm a trade nerd, okay? So I was like, yay, there's a new strategic exports office, yay. What does that actually mean? It's similar to the major projects office that was created, that's out here in Calgary, out west. The new strategic export office is meant for Canadian companies to be able to go and work with government people to break down doors within the Canadian government and cut through red tape that stops Canadians from exporting. It's hands-on help, which if you're someone like me, I've worked with companies for the past 40 years. That's what Canadian companies have been crying and begging for 40 years. Now, it's in the budget, yay. Now it's time to execute. Proof is in the pudding, right? Now we have to execute against this. So I'm not saying it's going to work. I'm hoping it's going to work, because for the first time, that's what we have here. Then there's some other money that was spent on things like expanding our ports, expanding our rail system, our ports in the Arctic, because that, I won't even get into the Arctic, but the Arctic is a whole other conversation. If you ever look at a map of the Arctic, you've got Russia's got more than 50% of it, Alaska's got a chunk, we have a whole big piece, and guess who has the other piece? Greenland. So suddenly, why are we at risk of being the 51st state and Greenland's at risk? Because if you look at a map, so I'm not going to say anything else about here. There's a bunch of different programs that are in place. Probably what's more important than that is the fact that there are buckets of money for Canadian companies to apply to. EDC got $5 billion to help Canadian companies diversify their exports. And more than that, EDC will stand behind a Canadian company who needs capital, cash, liquidity, pick your word, and they're going to a mainstream bank to get it. And if for whatever reason their credentials are not enough to get it on their own, and EDC sees that what you're trying to do is diversify your exports, they'll stand behind you. BDC, similar, $500 million. That's meant sort of more domestic. And I'm not going to talk today about interprovincial trade barriers, but it's a particular pet peeve of mine. And then finally, farm credit. obviously, for the agriculture business. And then finally, large enterprise loan facility. You probably heard recently in the news, those loans are a minimum 30 million. You probably heard recently that Algoma applied for a large loan. They got it through here. Final slide, and then we'll go to questions. So you already heard me say that 77 cents out of every Canadian dollar gets exported to the United States. And I don't think it's an opinion to say that that's not a well-balanced portfolio. We need to diversify our markets as Canadians. It's not a nice to have, it's a we don't have a choice anymore. We have to do this. Canada currently has 16 free trade agreements with 52 countries covering 60%, over 60% of the world's GDP. We have a whole bunch of free trade agreements that are signed on a shelf with an inch of dust on them. Most of these free trade agreements came into place during the Harper administration. So that tells you how long they've been sitting on the shelf. We have free trade with Europe, the European Union. The European Union has a higher population than the United States. Yes, it's got barriers to entry in that there's 27 different countries and there's different languages and there's different regulatory requirements about things than there are in North America. I know it's harder to export to Belgium than it is to Ohio. I know. But with the new Strategic Exports Office that Global Affairs is talking about, in conjunction with Canada's best kept secret, our Trade Commissioner Service. So Canada has Canadians in 180 countries around the world, boots on the ground, there to help Canadian companies to break into that market. A lot of companies that I speak to don't know that that exists. How much does it cost to use them? Oh, that would be free, because your taxpayer dollars pay for it. So there's free help that exists. A lot of companies in the past that I've talked to about it say, yeah, I know, but I'm in Belgium. It's so hard. It's so far away. Right? Ohio's right there. That thinking has to change. I want to open up and just look at a page here because I don't have this part quite memorized. So I'm a proud Canadian, going back on my mother's side of the family. We arrived here in the 1400s. I'm second generation British on my father's side. But as a proud Canadian, has anybody ever heard of Henry Woodward or Matthew Evans? Anybody? Anybody? Nope. Henry Woodward was a medical student. They're both from Toronto. Medical student in Toronto. Matthew Evans was a hotel keeper. In 1874, they created a little gadget. And they did all kinds of testing on it. The first few prototypes, it kind of worked, but not really. After God knows how many prototypes, they finally got their gadget to work. And they were like, we think we've got something here. They patented it in both Canada and the United States. We've got something here that's valuable. It's patented. Then they went out looking for funding. And everybody that they went to in Canada said, oh, this is too high risk. It's a gadget that nobody's ever seen before. Too high risk. So they went to the United States looking for funding. They ran into an American who said, I'll give you money, but I'm not going to fund it. I want to buy it. I'll buy your patents. Who was that person? Thomas Edison. What was the gadget? The light bulb. Canada does not lack ingenuity. We don't lack smarts. We don't lack talent. We don't lack any of that stuff. The United Nations has 195 countries listed. Actually, 193 countries and 2 observers, Vatican City and Palestine. Canada's the 10th largest economy in the world. We are forever hearing that we're 10% of the size of the United States. 10% of their population, 10% of their GDP. Right? We hear that all the time. We're living next to a giant on the world stage. And in my previous life, I flew all over the place with Stephen Harper. When you walk into international venues as a Canadian, we're not seen as small. We're seen as the 10th largest economy in the world. And depending on where we are, they might be 47th or 125th. So they look at us like we're enormous. We're the only ones who think we're small. And I speak for myself, and I know a lot of Canadians. That tends to be how we think about ourselves. So the challenge today is to stop thinking. I did this same speech yesterday in Toronto, and I had somebody ask me, I thought it was a great question, if you could have one wish from the government, Canadian government, Canadian business, and Canadian citizens, what would it be? From the Canadian government, walk the talk. You're putting money into global affairs, you're saying all the right things from an international trade diversification standpoint. Boy, you better mean it, because Canadian companies are going to need help big time. Walk the talk. What would I say from Canadian companies? The world is a really big place. And last time I was in Hong Kong, I went into Starbucks in Hong Kong. Why couldn't I go into Tim Hortons, just as an example? I did buy a coffee mug there because I collect the coffee mugs. But why am I not going into Tim Hortons in Hong Kong? And in the audience yesterday, somebody said, there is one in South Korea. Okay, there's a Tim Hortons in South Korea, apparently, never been there. But why are we not thinking globally? That's the challenge. And the third thing that I would say from what would I ask Canadian citizens to do? Elbows down. Why? It's not getting us anywhere. And the second thing I would say would be buy Canadian, but don't adopt a mentality of Canada first. That's not a good mentality. We are seen around the world as being honest, and what we say, we deliver on. And when we shake somebody's hand, we mean it. That's the reputation we have around the world. And whether we deserve it or not, people think the food that we make is healthier than American food, that the products we make are of higher quality than American products. I don't know why they think that, but they do. Let's live up to our reputation. Thank you, and I'll take questions.
Oh, hi, William Cow from Cargill. You didn't talk about canola and agricultural products. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So because of our current tariff disputes, I'll call it, with China, the Chinese have basically stopped buying canola from Canada. And now there's negotiations that are happening, and I'll speak to as well to the American negotiations and about the ad that Ontario ran. There are negotiations that are happening right now where what the Chinese would like to see is the 100% on the EVs come off is what they would want in exchange for the canola. That's going to be a really tough conversation, because to give up the 100% tariff on EVs, like I said earlier, if the Chinese EVs hit the North American market at about $10,000 to $15,000 US per car, it'll wipe out the Canadian automotive industry, which pretty much wipes out Ontario. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I know that there are conversations. I know Canada, in conjunction with Washington, is thinking about what they can do around the tariffs around EV because of the Canadian canola. I don't have a better answer than that at this point, but it's definitely being discussed and it's open. The other thing that I'll say is the ad that Ontario ran with who else? Ronald Reagan, talking about how tariffs were not good because he was a huge free trader. The conversations, remember, all negotiations are off. They're now on again. I don't think it's a coincidence that our Prime Minister said, when media asked him, so, Mr. Prime Minister, when are you next speaking to President Trump? And his response was, who cares? We'll talk when it's appropriate. I'm busy. I got stuff to do. And suddenly now he's likely going to be going to Washington next week. I don't think that's a coincidence in the timing. Yeah.
Great talk. By the way, I was just in Shenzhen and Tim Hortons.
Yay! Joy.
Okay, EPA, if it is ruled illegal,
Yep.
will it be retro?
That's a great question. So it's a legal conundrum in the United States because technically speaking, there is precedent in US law that states that if a tax has been deemed illegal for any reason, the tax has to be refunded to the taxpayer, right? So suddenly now you're talking about huge dollars that have been collected so far. And when people like me think about, oh my goodness, what is the administrative process going to look like to get that money back? It's daunting. So in theory, if the I.E.P.A. tariffs are found to be illegal, there should be refunds coming back to everyone. How long will it take people to get their money back? Good question, because there's going to be such an administrative snarl up, traffic jam. It's going to be crazy. It could take years to get your money back. And then there's a whole segment of the US legal community who believes that the Supreme Court may split the baby in two, may say I.E.P.A. tariffs are illegal, but we're not going to authorize refunds going backwards. They're illegal as of this day forward to no longer charge them. Figure something out. And you're also reminding me, so what happens if this current administration loses the I.E.P.A. court case at the Supreme Court? Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, has said there's a plan B. So I get asked, Joy, you know what the plan B is? No, I don't actually know what the plan B is, but I can guess. There is a piece of legislation, it's called the Trade Act of 1974. Section 122 gives the president the authority to charge 15% tariffs on any and all countries he deems appropriate for 150 days. Then he needs congressional approval to extend it beyond that. So if the Supreme Court decision comes down at noon on a Tuesday, by 1 o'clock on Tuesday, we're going to have an executive order, section 122, and then that buys them 150 days to do what? Turn everything into a section 232 tariff. Do you follow where I'm going with that? So.
Yeah. I understand, like, he's got a $1.8 trillion debt, or deficit, I should say, and he's trying to get 700 million is apparently the magic number. And if he doesn't get that way, it's 232, I think, is what the plan is, right? That's what you're saying.
Pretty much. And he talks, the current president of the United States talks about about 1870. How 1870 was the United States pinnacle. It was when the United States was shining with gold, and it was the richest period in US history. And you think, 1870, what was happening in 1870? If you look back in the history books, McKinley, who he has a painting of in his office, was president. There was no such thing as income tax, because income tax was created during World War I to help fund the war. So there was no income tax, and 100% of the government revenue at that point in time came from tariffs. And McKinley was known to raise tariffs really high. That's what was happening in 1870. I'll say one more thing. Are there any other questions? Oh, goodness, okay.
You're not done yet, Joy.
Okay.
First of all, wow, how do I work for you? And second of all, can you tell me more about Canada's far north and I guess what role we're going to play in it?
So Canada's far north, you know, I remember as a kid, and I'm old, I remember as a kid, like listening to the radio, and Santa was coming, and NORAD was tracking him, and you know, you listened on the radio for Santa coming across, and I was so proud of the fact the North Pole was in Canada. Oh, we have the North Pole. Back then, nobody paid attention to the fact the North Pole was in Canada, nor did anybody care that the North Pole was in Canada. It was just seen as a frozen neverland that who cared? Canada wants it, Canada can have it. Now, the Arctic is going to likely cause, if not the very next war, it will cause a war in the next 25 years. My prediction. Why is it happening? The snow cap is melting. It's going to become, with global warming, it's going to become the shortest shipping route from Asia to Canada, to North America. So if you could ship from Asia to North America, say go to Hudson's Bay, if there was a big enough port there is a port there now, but They're putting $1 billion into expanding that port. That would get there 5 days faster than Asia to Long Beach, California. You can put it on a train and get it into Illinois in 3 days. So now you're still 2 days faster than Long Beach, and you've got it in Chicago. So a lot of people are looking at that. A lot of countries are looking at that, because whoever rules the Arctic moving forward will rule international trade. So think back, I don't know how well you know your history, but the Suez Canal, Panama Canal, right? These things were critical. Whoever controlled the Panama Canal controlled the world's cargo going through North America. So the Americans controlled it for a very long time, right? That's what's going to happen in the Arctic. So now in the current budget, they're looking at spending $1 billion to build roads for both military and domestic civilian use. And they're looking at building a very large port to get ready for when we know what it's going to happen. Does that answer your question?
Actually, one more. I heard that the Northwest Passage, the United States is contesting that passage, saying that it should be free of any duties because we don't have the capacity to, I suppose, patrol those waters.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the other thing, right? So, I have great respect for our military. I have to say that up front. But I mean, people say the Canadian Navy, right? What's the Canadian Navy? And that's what other countries are saying to us now. Come on, guys. Come on. How many ships you got? How old are they? You're going to patrol all that? That's the risk that we run right now. That's why, one of the reasons why we're spending 2% of our GDP on NATO, and it's going to go up to 5% in the next 5 years. So, because a lot of countries, friendly ones are saying what you just said, unfriendly ones. So, fact, China has declared themselves an Arctic country. Really? Really? But they've declared themselves as such, which means they intend on owning some part of the Arctic. Whose part are they going to own? It's a risk. It's a real risk for us. I think there was another question back there somewhere.
Yeah, I've always wondered why more countries haven't hit on the U.S. service industry. It's 80% of their GDP. It's the most dynamic part of their economy these days. Why is everybody left alone?
In every one of those deals that I flashed up on the screen, and by the way, that was not a comprehensive list. I just chose the 3 biggest deals. Japan, the UK, and the EU. In each one of those deals, part of the terms and conditions of the United States on that page and a half is that thou shalt not bring in any sort of digital services tax, which a lot of those services that you're talking about are digital services, internet sales, that kind of stuff that didn't exist when a lot of income tax codes were written. Like the last major overhaul, I believe, to Canada's income tax code was like in the early 1970s. The internet didn't exist, right? So in those deals, it's if you bring a digital services tax in your country, this deal is off and your tariffs will go through the roof. We had a digital services tax that came into effect July 1st, but we had to put it on the block for a whole bunch of different reasons. That's why I said like elbows down, elbows up isn't necessarily serving us right. But that's one of the reasons why. The Americans are really, really aware of the fact that if anybody hits their service sector, that's their Achilles heel. So what they're doing is they're using a baseball bat with physical shipments to protect their services.
Good answer, thanks.
Anybody else? One over there.
Hello.
Hi.
So seeing how China has, over the years, gone from being the underdog to being in the headlines almost every other day, how do we think we as, Canadians can, first of all, maybe form a strategic partnership or alliance with China? because I think they're here to stay. And secondly, you know, we have America is not going to go down without a fight. In the event that there is any sort of fight, how do we protect Canada? Specifically, how do we ensure, as we continue to evolve as a country, we stay competitive and innovative?
So I'll go back to the fact that I said earlier, is Canada is the world's 10th largest economy. We have to start thinking and acting strategically. So you said it yourself, the Chinese have a very well thought out strategy that's been in place now for almost 30 years. It's called the Belt and Road Strategy. And they've been executing against it. And what their plan was at that time, if you wonder, like, why did China go and build cities in the middle of nowhere with like high-rise apartments and freeways and everything, and there was nobody around? Now those cities are full. They built in anticipation of what they were doing to their industrial base. So they pretty much decided, if we're going to have these massive factories and if we're going to be the manufacturers of the world, people got to live somewhere close to the factory. So the factory is going to be here. We're building high-rises and freeways and ports and all kinds of stuff. So it's called the Belt and Road Strategy. They've been working on it for 30 years, and they've been executing beautifully. If you remember your World War II history, and you look at World War II, two countries that had extensive damage at the end of the war, many did, but two countries that had extensive damage was Japan and Germany. Japan is currently the 3rd largest economy in the world, and Germany's 9th. Or 6th, can't remember, 9th or 6th for Germany. Japan's number 3. So they went from being literally in the rubble in 1945 to the largest economies now in the world in a period of, if you look at history, it's like 70 years. It's not 70, 80 years. It's not a long time. How did they do it? Very intentional, detailed plans on export diversification. 70% of Germany's GDP exports. So the answer to your question about China, we're going to have to learn to think more strategically and take up our space on the world stage. We're the 10th largest economy. We're a G7 country. We're the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with all other G7 countries. We've got really good tools in our tool belt, and we're not used to thinking of ourselves as being powerful because we're so used to, we have the little brother syndrome, right? We have to adopt that internal power, and we have to learn when we're sitting down with the Chinese, they may have something, we may have something that they want, we have something that they want. And we can't be there like this, negotiating with them. We have to sit down with confidence and realize, hey, you're dealing with us. That's the best answer I have for that. Just a pop quiz. Canada, how many countries does Canada have a land border with? Land border. How many countries? 1, the United States, right? Yeah, no, go ahead. 1, the United States. No, not a land border. So there's been talk, it's come up a couple of times, like in the past 15 years, about the North American bloc and whether or not Canada would be better suited being part of the EU as opposed to being part of a North American bloc. And you think, Canada, part of the EU? We're like an ocean apart. We actually have a land border with Denmark. It's up in the Arctic. I can't remember the name of the island right now, but it's an island that basically, right down the middle of it, is the Canada. That's right, we have a dispute over it. It's a tiny little island, but the dispute we've been having with the Danes, this is pretty much the end of World War II. They go up there to patrol, they knock down the Canadian flag, they put up a Dane flag, and they put a bottle of their whatever they drink, and we go on patrol, we knock down the flag, we put a Canadian, we put a bottle of Screech, right? Canada. And it's always been friendly, and it's always been, you know, in a friendly, non-confrontational way. So we do have a land border with an EU country. Technically speaking, that means we could apply to the EU. I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying little factoid most Canadians don't know. We have a land border with Denmark. Any other questions? It's been my pleasure to be here today. Thank you.